More so than any other theme park, Universal Orlando has perhaps the most legendary, iconic list of old attractions that have since been replaced. After all, Universal's name in the game, ever since they opened, has been destroy, build, destroy. Rinse and repeat. Open a new ride, eventually it's getting closed and replaced by something else. This is not Disney World where we're keeping rides around till the end of time. That's not happening at Universal. At least that's been the story up to this point. Now with Epic Universe's plot of land now within Universal's holding, they don't necessarily have to replace rides as much as they had previously, because the main reason for that was not necessarily just because they wanted to get rid of these old rides, though in some cases they most certainly did. In many cases, it was because they simply didn't have the land to expand the park or build new attractions without replacing something. They simply had to replace things if they wanted to keep updating the park, freshening up, and advancing the experiences that they were offering. Disney, on the other hand, has the luxury of operating basically a small city of their own with plenty of land to expand and build should they choose to. However, now that Universal has more land to call their own, of course, they don't have to do as much replacing, but they also now have more opportunities to build more attractions, which means more opportunities to potentially bring back old attractions that were previously replaced. And we're already starting to see auditions take place, as Universal has already brought back a number of properties that previously had attractions for a limited time movie parade, the mega movie parade that brings back Jaws, Back to the Future, and Ghostbusters into the park in a major way that they've never been in before and haven't been in since their rides have closed. And to go alongside this, you also have more merchandise for these properties at the limited time summer tribute store. So basically, the reason why I'm calling this an audition is because Universal is testing the level of interest in these properties in the parks once again. Because of course, we obviously see the discourse online. Everyone and their mother wants Jaws back. Everyone and their mother wants Back to the Future back, right? That's the overwhelming consensus online. But as we know, a lot of times the consensus online is not necessarily what people actually think, and it's just kind of a vocal minority of people who actually believe that. So Universal, in trying to do some sort of market research here, is bringing these properties back into the park in a meaningful way without going ahead and investing in an attraction, without really knowing just quite how interested the general public really is in these properties coming back. And the property that's arguably getting the biggest audition, the grandest one, is Ghostbusters. Obviously, Ghostbusters used to be in Universal Studios Florida with the Ghostbusters Spooktacular. But also, Ghostbusters is not just getting the parade and the tribute store as a test to see whether or not guests still have interest in the property. They are also coming back to Halloween Horror Nights. Once again, this will be the second time that Ghostbusters has been to Halloween Horror Nights in recent years. Not to mention, the movie that this new house will be based on just came out this year. Ghostbusters is still making new movies that are at least moderately successful, I guess. This last one wasn't really super popular or super successful. But the bottom line is that Sony, the property's owners, are at least trying to keep the Ghostbusters property relevant today. But that's really the kicker there, isn't it? The fact that Sony owns this property and Universal does not own it themselves, meaning they would have to pay Sony for the licensing rights, which obviously they already are paying Sony for them, at least to some sort of degree, to have them in this parade and to sell their merchandise in the parks. Obviously, it's already happening, but with an attraction, especially a permanent one, those agreements would have to be changed and would likely cause Universal to pay a lot more money to Sony to have those rights to have them in the park. Certainly, Ghostbusters could make for a great attraction. The Spooktacular was a very cool show. I don't think there's any doubt about it. They could actually make a true ride for Ghostbusters that could be really fun and really cool and really special effects heavy. But the fact you do have to pay this third party for the property rights is not something Universal's been really keen on doing in recent years, and typically that is reserved for the super high level, super popular IPs that Universal doesn't own. So think about your Harry Potters, what they're paying Warner Brothers for. Think about Nintendo. Of course, that's another very popular property that Universal doesn't own. And most other rides that Universal had based on third-party properties that they had to pay licensing rights for have since gone with the wind. And there are very few remaining, and all signs point to them likely seeing the door within the next few years. So this really is a huge audition for Ghostbusters, because it really has to prove to be extremely popular if Universal is going to take the shot on building a permanent attraction for them, knowing that they have to pay those extra licensing rights to Sony in order to bring them to the park. And though, quite frankly, Ghostbusters does have a better shot than many to come back to the park, given the fact that they do have this opportunity to audition for Universal, I don't really feel great about their odds of coming back with a new attraction. But what about the other properties in the mega movie parade? These other properties that are getting a chance to audition in front of general public guests today. What about Jaws? After all, it's probably the most talked about closed, extinct, defunct attraction in Universal history. Obviously, a big reason for that is because of how beloved it was and how unique of an attraction it was. But another part of that is because of how problematic it was. The fact that the ride constantly had technical issues and cost Universal millions of dollars in order to maintain and upkeep and refurbish the attraction. So this reputation that Jaws has really means two things for Universal. One, they have massive shoes to fill. It's going to be very hard to live up to the image that the original Jaws ride has in many guests' heads. So if they do come out with a new ride and it is different, or it is trying to be the same thing, whatever it is, it's going to be very hard to live up to the original, and it's going to be heavily scrutinized and criticized if it does not meet those expectations. And then, of course, there's the second part of this, which is that a Jaws ride that's anything like the original would likely cost Universal a pretty penny, not only to build, but especially to operate. Not to mention the potential operational pitfalls and downtime that the ride could potentially face. And for a long time, I was a big believer in the fact that these two hurdles would ultimately result in a Jaws ride never returning to Universal. However, given the fact that the Jaws ride in Universal Studios Japan, one that's very similar to the one that used to operate at Universal Studios Florida, is still operating today and really doesn't seem to have any signs of closing anytime soon, fills me with new optimism that perhaps a Jaws ride that is faithful to the original while still also being an upgrade from the original could actually still come to Universal in the coming years. It's not impossible. However, that being said, it still doesn't need to be proven just how popular Jaws is as a property today. Sure, with the Universal core fan base, they're obviously rabid about Jaws. The question is, does the general public still care about Jaws? After all, there hasn't been a new Jaws movie in years. I don't even know how long. I mean, the sequels to Jaws really did nothing. They didn't really light the box office on fire, and they certainly were not well received by the general public. And though this could all be forgiven if Universal were to remake or reboot Jaws, though there have been talks about it, nothing has come to fruition as of this moment. So the question is, does Universal feel really confident about bringing a new Jaws ride back to the Universal Park, spending all that money, only for it to not have any sort of corporate synergy that Comcast, their parent company, their overlord, seems to be obsessed with now? That's why rides like Jimmy Fallon get built. Or do they not see the risk reward as being worth it? Do they not see that a Jaws ride, though it could be popular, though it could be well received, would a Jaws ride result in an increase in sales in other regards, in merchandise and in food and in media? Would it do the same thing that a Despicable Me ride could do as far as bringing new money to the Universal property as a whole? I'm not really sure that it could, and I think that's the issue that Universal's really kind of saddled with, at least if they don't go ahead and make a new movie. If they do make a new movie, then there really could be much more monetary value and incentive behind bringing Jaws back. But if they're never going to go through with that, whether because they don't feel confident in it, or Spielberg doesn't sign on, whatever it may be, then I just don't know if a ride really makes financial sense. And then you have Back to the Future. Again, iconic film series, iconic attraction, getting tested in the mega movie parade. But the problem with this is that, honestly, I do not feel confident at all that Universal will ever make any new media associated with Back to the Future, because that is so reliant on the two main characters, Doc and Marty. Obviously, that's never happening. We're not making a new movie with those two characters in them. They've gotten far too old in order to reprise those roles. And listen, given Hollywood's recent behavior, I'm sure a Back to the Future remake will happen at some point, but I don't think that's anytime soon. I think that's still decades away from happening. And quite frankly, though Back to the Future is still very popular, I don't think it's popular enough to stand alone without other media properties kind of backing it up and boosting its popularity with modern audiences. And let's be honest too, this is not Back to the Future's first test. Unlike Ghostbusters and unlike Jaws, that are really getting their first big push into the Universal parks with this mega movie parade in recent years, Back to the Future never really left, even after The Simpsons took over. Doc has still been meeting and greeting guests in the parks every day since then. So they know what level of popularity that character has. They know what level of popularity the DeLorean that's sitting in the park still has. They know what level of interest people have in Back to the Future. This is not so much of a test for Back to the Future as much as these other ones, because Universal has already been testing Back to the Future for years. And let's be honest, if the stats showed well, if people were really going crazy for Doc, if they were taking a ton of pictures with the DeLorean, then yeah, Universal would know, oh wait, the general public really still loves Back to the Future, even though there's no new media franchises or properties coming out to back it up and boost its popularity. But that seems like it's likely not the case, as Universal has obviously made no effort. They've made no indication that they're working on a Back to the Future attraction or that it's coming back in any way, shape, or form in that regard. So if it hasn't happened now, it's never going to happen, at least not until Back to the Future does have its resurgence when it's inevitably rebooted in a couple decades. So now that we've gone through the three properties that Universal is actively giving an audition to, they're actively testing out with general audiences, now seems as good a time as any to just go ahead and dice any hopes you had for several other attractions that previously existed in Universal's history. So Poseidon's Fury, the recently closed attraction in Islands of Adventure, nope, never coming back. Its partner in crime, the Eighth Voyage of Sinbad, nope, never coming back. Barney? No, never coming back, sorry. Dueling Dragons, I mean, unless you count Stardust Racers at Epic Universe to be its spiritual successor, no, never coming back. Fear Factor, yeah, okay, that'll be the day. That's never coming back. Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies. Man, I'd love for that to come back, but no, that's never coming back. Hanna-Barbera? I mean, listen, if they weren't doing a whole land based around Universal Monsters, I'd say maybe Scooby-Doo has a chance, but with that already happening, I don't think there's a place for it, so no, you're out. The Wild Wild West Stunt Show? No. Fievel? No. Woody Woodpecker? No. Curious George? No. Terminator? Yes. Kind of. Terminator, after all, was in Universal Studios Florida as T2 3D Battle Across Time, a pretty cool stage show that, dare I say, was pretty revolutionary as it combined screens with real-life actors, which is really cool, honestly, and has been since adopted by its replacement in the Bourne Stuntacular. And obviously, as proven by T2 3D, there's a lot of really cool stuff you could do in an attraction with the Terminator brand. But, as we also know, the Terminator brand has been run into the absolute dirt by Paramount, who's been making an absolute mockery out of the franchise, been making dog water movie after dog water movie that just further polarizes the fan base and makes people not want to see any more Terminator whatsoever. They just want to live in their fantasy world where only Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 exist. They don't even want to hear about any other Terminator movies, even though James Cameron and Paramount still apparently have plans for more Terminator movies going forward and are trying desperately to get the people back on board and trying to make a good Terminator movie once again. They've continued and failed time after time after time, and the fan base is sick and tired of it. And it's actually gone the opposite way of an attraction like Back to the Future, which has a fan base that has become kind of stagnant, or at the very least is neutral towards the property because there hasn't been any new media outputs put out by Universal. In the case of Terminator, there has been new stuff, but it's all been bad. So the fan base has actually become less interested in Terminator stuff as a result. So really, the only way Terminator is coming back to the Universal Parks with a permanent attraction is if Paramount can get it figured out in the film franchise. After all, as we established earlier, it is a third-party property, so it has to meet a higher degree of quality as a property than other Universal owned properties because they do have to pay that licensing right on top of it to have it in the park. And as we know, the odds of Paramount making a good Terminator movie nowadays are slim to none. So that's likely not going to happen. But the reason why I say the Terminator does have a chance to come back to the Universal parks is because I still am holding out hope for a Halloween Horror Nights house. This feels like an long overdue idea. It would be so cool and genuinely scary, and would be just a great IP integration for Halloween Horror Nights. I'm shocked they haven't done it yet. This has been an idea I've been putting out there for ages now. I'm hoping that maybe they actually do it, and that would be a great way to have Terminator back in the park. And if you want to give Terminator an audition, hey, that'd be the way to do it, I guess. But really, I mean, I think that you can at least do that, work with Paramount on a short-term basis to get that house done. There's no long-term commitment. There's not a bunch of money spent. And you get to have your cake and eat it too and have Terminator come back for a limited time engagement. Now, on that note, since we're talking about third-party properties owned by Paramount in particular, let's talk about Nickelodeon. After all, Nickelodeon, a long-standing relationship with Universal, very important to their history. They had Nickelodeon Studios there where they filmed a lot of their live-action TV shows. And of course, you also had Jimmy Neutron, Nicktoon Blast for only 8 years, believe it or not. It was less than a decade it was there, but it really was a pillar of Universal's kid-friendly offerings for those 8 years. So that being said, is Nickelodeon Studios coming back? Absolutely not. Is Jimmy Neutron coming back? Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's not happening either. However, Universal can still work with Nickelodeon on an attraction. It still is very possible. After all, SpongeBob is still in the parks. He still has a store near the former Kid Zone, now DreamWorks Land, in Universal Studios, Florida. So that means that, yeah, Universal still has some sort of licensing agreement that they've held on to since the days of Jimmy Neutron and the Nickelodeon Studios, where they do still have the licensing rights to SpongeBob in the very least. And as we all know, SpongeBob is one of the most popular, most iconic kid animated shows of all time. It's not even a question. It might be the most popular animated show of all time, period. And I think we can all agree that a theme park ride made by Universal for SpongeBob could be really cool and really unique. Nonetheless, an entire theme park land themed to SpongeBob could be awesome with a Krusty Krab restaurant. Are you kidding me? Where you get to actually have a Krabby Patty? It goes without saying, this would be a masterclass in theme park creation right here, right? If they went ahead and brought SpongeBob to life in the Universal parks. So, you're saying, well, then why don't they just go ahead and do that? Right? It seems like a slam dunk victory to bring SpongeBob to the parks, give him his own land, or just his own ride, either way, and go ahead and bring in the big bucks, because obviously it's going to be a cash cow if you were to bring it in. Here's the problem. It's really no surprise that Universal does still have the licensing agreement in place for SpongeBob, because Paramount gives this thing out to theme parks like hotcakes. It is so easy to get the licensing rights for SpongeBob to be in a theme park. It's ridiculous. He's already featured in several parks throughout the world, two of which being in the United States with the Nickelodeon Universe parks inside the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the American Dream Mall near MetLife Stadium in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And there were also previously plans announced that potentially another one of these parks would be coming to Miami at some point in the future. Though we don't know where that project stands at the moment, what we do know is that what's very core and important to Universal's business plan is having exclusive experiences. The fact that it's the only place where you can go and enter the world of Harry Potter. It's the only place where you can enter the world of Jurassic Park. To say, hey, yeah, we're the fourth place in the United States where you can go ahead and ride a SpongeBob ride, that's not really a super convincing or persuasive asset in your marketing material, especially when you're talking about Universal, which costs vastly more to visit than any of these other regional players. Not to mention that you want to talk about building a land. Well, now it won't even be the only place you can get a Krabby Patty, as apparently Wendy's is going to start selling Krabby Patties. As soon as you can literally get a Krabby Patty anywhere in the country, forget about just in these one specific location. SpongeBob is going to be pretty much everywhere. Thanks, Paramount. You've thrown away any opportunity to build something cool here that could actually be useful in Universal's marketing material. Now, that might not necessarily be the most compelling argument against this property and bringing it to the parks, because, I mean, Universal could still make a really cool and really immersive and really popular SpongeBob land that could still draw guests and make Universal a whole lot of money. But at the end of the day, it is still a third-party property. And if Universal is going to spend this extra money to license the rights for this property and ultimately promote a competitor in Paramount's property and their TV shows and their movies that are based on SpongeBob instead of promoting Universal's own films and TV shows, then if Universal's going to sign up to do this, it has to be a slam dunk, surefire thing that this is going to work out for Universal. And the fact that there is any risk at all is already too much when talking about third-party properties today. When you talk about Nintendo, when you talk about Harry Potter, there's no risk there. It is all gain, no pain. That cannot be said for SpongeBob. So enough with the third properties then. Let's go into something that Universal owns. How about something that just had a new movie that was a surprise smash hit in Twister? Twister Ride It Out was a show, a special effects heavy show that used to emulate a tornado right in front of you at the Universal Studios Florida. It was since replaced by Jimmy Fallon, kind of hilarious, and now has a smash hit legacy sequel in Twisters that just broke out at the box office. And listen, if you had asked me a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever, if Twister was ever coming back to Universal Studios Florida, or Universal Studios Orlando in general, I would say absolutely not. Not a chance in the world. That ride was far too expensive to operate for a ride that nobody really went to at all. Even when it was about to close, nobody cared about this attraction whatsoever. But now that interest has been renewed in Twister, thanks to Twisters, all of a sudden, there seems to be a real chance that this could come back. Certainly, it wouldn't be a special effects show like the original Twister Ride It Out was, but I think something like maybe a Spider-Man, as crazy as to say, that involved screens, but then maybe at the end had the giant live-action special effects tornado that you go by, could be really cool, and then the rest of the ride would be screens more or less, right? I think that would be really cool and be a really good way for Universal to cut down on cost when it comes to building this attraction. And you talk about all the other cons and risks that we talked about with all these other properties so far today. It's not a Universal property. Twisters is. It's not relevant enough today. It doesn't have media output today that's actually popular. Twisters does. And unlike Jaws or Back to the Future, which have these sort of monolithic reputations to live up to as attractions, Twister Ride It Out was not anywhere near as popular of an attraction. It was not anywhere near as beloved. So you don't necessarily have huge shoes to fill. You really have liberty to do whatever you want without running the risk of being heavily criticized for not living up to your predecessor, because the bar is much lower. So I don't know, man. Call me crazy optimist, but I actually have big belief that Twister could come back, or at the very least has made itself an incredibly appealing candidate for Universal to bring back for an attraction. The question is, where do you put it? There's certainly no Oklahoma land in either the Universal parks, you know? There's not really a great place to put it. My only thought would maybe be replacing Fear Factor Live or Men in Black back there in the World Expo part of the park. That's my only thought as far as where this would make thematic sense to place it. But hey, either way, it's going to be an awesome attraction, at least has the potential to be. And speaking of potential, I mean, this property has turned out to be the perfect storm, pun intended, of qualities to have for a theme park attraction. So I just feel like Universal would be silly at this point to ignore it, especially if this movie continues to run out at the box office, at the home media market, and does eventually have another film in the franchise. And you know what, folks? I'm going to take this one step further, because you know what? If people really showed up to Twisters and they really liked it, it really might indicate that the general audience is actually a lot more interested in disaster movies than they had been over the last few decades. And maybe the disaster movie is back in general. Now, I'm not saying you bring back disaster, but I am saying perhaps you bring back Earthquake. I mean, after all, obviously with the success of Twisters, Universal might look at the rest of their disaster movie portfolio and see, hey, what can we remake? What can we make a legacy sequel to? And Earthquake, being an extremely popular movie at the box office back in the 70s, could be a quality candidate to remake today. And who's to say, if they were to remake that, if it were to be popular, that Earthquake couldn't return with a ride of its own in the same vein as Twister has made itself a quality candidate today. I think Earthquake could do the same thing if Universal were to go that route. And speaking of legacy sequels, the last property I'm going to talk about here today is, of course, Beetlejuice, getting a new movie this year in Beetlejuice, and previously had an attraction in Universal Studios Florida with the Beetlejuice Graveyard Review. Now, like Back to the Future, even though Beetlejuice's attraction has been gone from the park for a number of years now, he still makes appearances in the park as a walk-around character. So it does seem like it kind of has two things going for it, right? It seems like it's a pretty good little culmination of stuff here happening for Beetlejuice, right? Well, it doesn't just end there. Beetlejuice, of course, made an appearance at Halloween Horror Nights with his own house. And though it was fairly well received, it was marred by COVID. I can't even imagine if that hadn't been affected by that, how popular the house could have potentially been. Not to mention that, of course, Beetlejuice really has had his resurgence through the musical on Broadway, which has really brought renewed interest and new fans to Beetlejuice. And between all of this, Beetlejuice is actually almost certainly the most popular he has ever been. That being said, though, there is still a little bit of apprehension from Universal. After all, he is a third-party property. They do still have to pay a licensing agreement to have him appear in the parks. And if they were to make an attraction for him, of course, those licensing fees would go up. But if this new Beetlejuice movie is a success, then I think Universal would find themselves in a bit of a pickle if they didn't go ahead and do something significant with Beetlejuice. I honestly think you have to do a ride with Beetlejuice. I don't know if he necessarily makes sense even in that avenue, but a show for Beetlejuice seems like a no-brainer, right? I mean, they had him a part of the horror makeup show for a short time during COVID. I think you could literally just completely revamp that show to just make it a Beetlejuice show. I mean, it just seems long overdue for Beetlejuice to have his own attraction once again. And if this movie really is a big hit, you are making a huge mistake and losing out on quite a lot if you do not go ahead and give Beetlejuice a bigger platform in the parks. So there you have it, folks, the old Universal Orlando rides and attractions that stand a chance to return to the parks in this day and age. And if you're looking at this list and you're saying to yourself, man, there's no way that modern day Universal is going to make an attraction based on any of this. Listen, folks, let us not forget that King Kong was brought back after Kongfrontation was closed and returned back to the parks with Skull Island Reign of Kong. So hey, folks, do not sit there and doubt that any of these can come back, because Universal has already proven that they are willing to bring back an old property when it makes sense. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you're interested to see what rides could potentially be replaced to make way for these new attractions for these old rides, go ahead and click the video in the middle of your screen right now, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.